Cool. So Halil, you can pass it over to someone.
Yeah, maybe Andre, introduce yourself.
Sure thing. My name is Andre. I'm a senior front-end engineer in the release group, and I'm based in Munich, Germany. Andrew, why wouldn't you go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew. I'm also a senior front-end engineer and also based in Toronto, Canada. Let's go to Ahmed.
Hey everyone, my name is Ahmed and I am based in Berlin, Germany. I'm also senior backend on the release team, so like every other backend engineer here. Bala, you want to go next?
Hi everyone, so I'm Bala Kumar and senior backend engineer in the release team. Yeah, I've been with GitLab for the last 2 years and I'm based in Chennai, India. I think we can pass it over to Lad.
Hey everyone. I'm an acting engineer manager on the team. My name is Lad. I am located in the Netherlands in Amsterdam. And over to you, Alan.
I'm Alan Cook. I'm a senior backend engineer police team, and I'm in Kentucky, USA. I think that's it for GitLab people, right?
Yeah, I think so. Cool. Now we'll pass.
Hi.
Oh, there.
Well, good morning from the Central Time Zone in the United States. My name is Matt Diddle, and I'm a Partner Channel Solutions Architect, work with GitLab partners. And I'm based in St. Paul, Minnesota. Right now I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA.
Cool. Now we can pass it over to some of our community members on the call to introduce themselves. Missy, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Missy. I am based out of the Boston area, but often travel a lot as a nomad. I started contributing to GitLab a few months ago, and I'm working on getting my first MR ready, hopefully this week. Feeling pretty good about it. So hello, everyone. And I'll pass to who's left here. Ashutosh, sorry about that. Let me know how you pronounce that properly.
I saw Ashutosh responded in the chat saying, hey, everyone. Cool. And I think the last person is, and Ashutosh is new to the open source community. Hope you don't mind I'm vocalizing the comments. Cool. Well, welcome. Glad to have you here. And I think the last person is Anatoly. If you want to introduce yourself as well on the chat or over mic, either works.
Hello, I'm Anatoly. I'm based in Minsk, Belarus. I was like MVP for doing some documentation MRs a few releases ago. I'm hanging out mostly to make a practice of my skills so I can find a job finally somewhere. So yeah, I'm not sure that if this group is for release of GitLab or the release tool that people use to make releases. So would be interested to know this in an intro.
Yeah, so I can start with a little intro of this. I noticed we had someone else join, so I'll let them introduce after, but this is the office hours for the release team. So we kind of work on the release features within GitLab, so around like environments, deployments, releases, feature flags. So it's a team working on those tools within GitLab, not the team releasing different portions of GitLab, if that answers your question.
Yeah, that answers it. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome, no problem. And it looks like we had one other person join, Bhavishya. If you'd like to introduce yourself as well, we're just going around doing introductions. And you can do that in the Zoom chat or over mic. Cool. Well, I guess we can get started now. I think before we get into the main topic, is there any other questions people have about the release office hours or anything you wanted to ask kind of before we jumped in? If not, I can hand it over to Bala, who has our main topic today on demo on controller implementation. So Bala, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, so let me share my screen, and for today's topic on the controller implementation, we are going to walk through the presentation that I've put forward along with code reviews and local runs. So yeah, let me start my screen sharing. Yeah, if you are able to see my screen and the presentation, just give a thumbs up so that we can see. Great. So yeah, I'm Balakumar, and I'm senior backend engineer in the release group. And for today's community office hours, we are going to discuss controller implementations. Just classified the entire presentation into 3 categories based on what most of our community contributors expertise belong to. So roughly it will be a simple category, and then a moderate, and then an advanced. For each of these categories, I've just identified issues that we have worked in the past along with an MR, which we'll walk through and then do some local runs to understand what that piece of code does. Yeah, and based on time, I'm planning to do simple and moderate today, and if time permits the advanced, we just push it to the next office hours. Starting with the simple implementation. So there was an existing issue. Feel free to open those links. I've already populated those. So just going ahead and then sharing that particular pro window, which just details for that. So this is the issue where as a team, we wanted to log additional information from the requests that are getting into this controller. Yeah, so to be specific, we wanted to log the search parameters that was getting into the environments controller. So before we visit the MR, let us see what this does in the UI, right? So this is GitLab local, and I have a test repository, so I'm just visiting the environments page. Just give a few seconds for it to load. Things are a bit slow in my local today, so I'm just going to stop a few more processes here. So for those of you wondering, I just opened the development.log and the development JSON log in this split screen, so that it just helps with identifying the code walkthroughs that we are doing. So yeah, the page is loaded, and these are the environments that are available for this project. And let us, on a higher level, let us walk through how this controller looks like, right? Yeah, so this is the environments controller, and for people not familiar with the code, this might sound overwhelming, so we'll just break it down. But yeah, it just starts. This is the environments controller, and we have a bunch of actions that this controller does. So from the UI, how do I backtrack to identify where this controller and where the file locates? So I just visited that page, right? So in your development JSON log, you'll be able to find the particular controller and the action that was called when I opened that UI. So this particular UI action that I hit in my browser is pointing to the environments controller index action. So yeah, that's how you can backtrack to particular controller and the method that was called. So this is how the controller looks. Just go back to the window and wanted to drill down the finer details there. Yeah. So wanted to control the application controller that this control extends from. This is what we see, right? So we see that the environments controller is extending from the application controller. Most of these controllers will extend from the application controller or child controllers, whose main parent will be the application controller. So high level, this controller handles a bunch of authentications, other specific requirements, doing a bunch of checks, filters, and stuff like that. And most often we won't touch the application controller, so we just inherit from that. And for this particular issue, we are going to extend on top of this particular method, which is already existing, which is append. We wanted to append some extra information to the payload, which is getting logged. And if you're wondering what the super does, so we are using the log range file gem, which does the structured logging that we see in the application JSON logger. And yeah, so this is the documentation for the log range, and there we can see that it has documentation on how to use this particular method so that we log extra information. So the GitLab application controller is extending that particular feature from the log range. And if we notice the environments controller, it's calling the application controller. The application controller in turn calls the gem implementation for this particular method. So I'll just, so that's the higher level. We wanted to inherit the application controller. And then on top of that, we have a bunch of before filters. And most often, these before filters are used to handle authorizations. And in GitLab, we use the declarative policies framework for this particular authorizations on how we wanted to handle authorizations. So this documentation has details on how this works, how the implementation is, and all of that. But yeah, I'll just walk through a high level on how this works. So for the existing methods, metrics additional and metrics dashboard, Let us see that what this method does. So all of these are like authorization specific. So I'm just going to take one particular example, not going to walk through the entire bunch of it. Let us see what this one does. So yeah, I know that where this policy exists, and you can go through the documentation, but yeah, so read environment it has a set of permissions and a set of rules attached to that policy. For example, unless the user has access to a bunch of rules, they won't be able to view it. So using the before filters, we ensure that the user who currently logs in has the right set of permissions to view the actions that they want. So that is what we do in the before filters. And these are like internal methods, which are specific to GitLab, and we need not worry about them because in case if we miss them, the Robocop rule will catch it, and it will point to the guidelines on how to populate these fields. So I'll just come to go back to the main slides on the next topic that we wanted to cover. I'm not sure if most of the people here are aware of using the debugger. If so, can you just let me know? I just wanted to get the pulse of the audience here. Anyone have prior experience using binding.py the non-GitLabers? Great. Okay. Yeah. Let us see how that works, right? So this is one of the debuggers that we use in GitLab. So for the page load, we already identified that it opens the index page. It comes to the index method. So let me add a debugger here or a breakpoint here and see how that works. So this gem is already installed by the application. We just need to invoke it. So just call bundle exit price shell and it should open the debugger shell. Just give some time so that it loads, and then we can go back to the page and then reload it. Right. So the prompt has opened. So I'm just going to modify the configuration so that it auto connects. And go to the main menu. I'm going to refresh this page and see if a breakpoint is working. See what is happening in the logs. I see here there is some activity here. So we do see that the control of the program is stopped as paused here. And this is the interactive shell that we get, and we can inspect two debugging that we wanted. For instance, if we wanted to do the params, we can do the params and then toggle or modify variables. So I'm just going to exit from this, go back, and I see that the page is still continuing. It has moved on from the breakpoint, and it has gone to the next set of program lines, and we see that the page is getting loaded. So that is partial in short, but yeah, I've given the link in the documentation for you to go through and to analyze the internals of it. And the next set of things that we wanted to cover here is feature flag in GitLab development and the aspect from the particular MR. So what we did, the implementation that we did for this particular simple controller enhancement was to append this extra information which was coming from params. And we wanted to pass it on to the log range payload. So, and what we do notice is we were using a snippet called as feature.enabled and a symbol. So what we are doing is we are using GitLab feature flags that we are using in development. So if the feature flag is enabled, we proceed and then we go ahead with logging. Otherwise, we just wanted to reject. And of course, this we are ensuring that the param was present.
Vala, I noticed there's a question in the chat from Ashutosh saying, hey, can you give a brief introduction about the debugging process in GitLab, such as what it is and what's the use of it?
So we primarily use, in local, most of our developers use PriceShell, and PriceShell is the interactive debugger prompt that works on top of multi-threaded Ruby environments like Puma and Sidekick. So we always prefer that. So this is a gem, and it is built by one of our GitLab team members, and it just brings in the features of Pry into a nice interactive shell. And there are, of course, other Ruby debuggers like Bybug, Pry, and all of that. And if in the prompt, if you wanted to add shortcuts and stuff like that, or move by stacks, stack frames on how we do with general no debuggers. So those steps and commands are listed over in this documentation. So yeah, primarily for development, we use the PriceShell, and using it is just very straightforward on the particular breakpoint on the line before where you wanted to add a breakpoint, just add this snippet, and then you open the interactive shell, and you should the Ruby process should relay the information to the PriceShell process, and you should be able to debug. For example, when I load for adding the breakpoint to this line, the control stops here, and I'll be able to view the request context specific to this particular breakpoint. So let me just go through this. And let's say that we wanted to see what is the project. I'll be able to inspect that particular variable. What this project class is. So those are the various level of drill downs that we can do. And yeah, I think that just explains. Any questions? Any other questions? Great. Right, we were talking about feature development. with respect to using feature flags in GitLab development with respect to that particular issue. And yeah. So how do we use feature flags in development? There is a detailed documentation about that. I've given the link in the slide. So high level, this is how we use feature flags in GitLab development. So we'll have a YAML file. Most of it is self-explanatory. We should have the name for a feature flag, and then these details are required. Introduced by URL, rollout URL, the milestone where we wanted to roll this out. And this is important. Before we turn on a feature flag, it is absolutely necessary that the default enable state of it is always false. So just having this YAML will give you this flexibility to use the snippet called as feature.enabled, and environment search logging corresponds to the name that we have in the YAML file. Underneath, we use FlipperGem, and internally it uses the Redis store. So the GitLab developers have access to uses Slack, and we rolled out in phases. For community contributors, you may not have access, but yeah, if a feature flag is recommended in development or it was suggested by the reviewers or maintainers, it's good to correlate or work along with your reviewers and maintainers so that the GitLab team members enable them on gitlab.com in phases, and they give the status update of it. In most cases, you'll have a rollout issue where you can just monitor the progress of how this feature flag was enabled. Copy it, right? So yeah, so in this case, it was done by Halil, one of our team members. But yeah, if as a community contributor, if you wanted this to be done by a GitLab team member or an MR reviewer or maintainer, that is possible, and that is the process we usually follow. So this snippet ensures checks for the feature state, whether it is enabled or not. If it is not enabled, it returns, and if it is enabled, it just logs the particular extra information. So this is a straightforward thing. Any questions here?
I've got a quick question. I think you mentioned this, Bala, but how do you enable a feature flag? Is that something only that the maintainers at GitLab can do?
So we use this data store tool called as Flipper. It's a gem. The backend for it is Redis, and the community contributors will not have direct access to it. But yeah, you primarily want someone from GitLab to enable that or roll it out in phases and give you that information. So for that, what we usually do is we have a rollout issue. And most of these rollout issues are publicly available, and the GitLab team member will enable that in Slack. So we have Slack bot commands to do that, and the progress will be usually updated in this particular rollout issue on at what is the percentage by which it is which was enabled.
Thanks.
And, yeah, you see here, right? These are like Slack commands that the team member runs, and the output of it is will be followed up. I think this is a work in progress issue, but yeah, for I think for other feature flags which have been already rolled out, you can just go through. So you'll have the details populated there. Does that answer your question, Missy?
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So yeah, this is what we did. We appended this extra information and with along with the feature flag. And moving on to the specs, we wanted to ensure that we have a test case for it. So in this particular context, we wanted to check, do this test without the flag. So we have a global helper to do that, which is called as stub feature flags. So all of these helper methods are available in the documentation, so which is available in the link that is there in the presentation. So for the first context, we tested with false, and then for the next context, we set it to true. So I'm just going to quickly run one of these test cases in my local. Let us start with this, right? So what we wanted to see is when the feature flag is disabled, we do not want to log the extra payload. So we affirm, so we assert those using expectations that the RSpec framework does, and we visit the search page, and we just for those assertions. So yeah, this is how we usually run an aspect. I think in the last community office hours as well, I think Hamid spent a great amount of time on running aspects. So I'm just going to quickly glance over it. So environments controller spec, and this is the line number 1033. So yeah, this is what the MR has, and we wanted to run this particular test, which is 1041. Just going to give it a few seconds. I'm not sure if this is taking longer. I'll just skip it and then give it some time to finish it while we move on to the next topic and then come back over to it. Right. So yeah, this was a simple iteration. We saw how the controllers extend from the application controllers, how we have before filters for ensuring authorizations, and the other high-level GitLab specific details that we wanted to ensure, and then using the debugger, using feature flags in GitLab development and spec. So this is so if you wanted to see what how the aspect is running, you just tell the test.log, and like the development JSON log, the test as well as test JSON log. So that if the controller is visited by the test framework, you will be able to see those details as well. So yeah, this is just booting up the process. I'm just going to move forward and then revisit this later. So that's with the simple issue that we wanted to cover. Any questions I can take?
Yeah, I got a question. Like, this session covered if you want to put some debug information for GitLab development to log some information. But what if I want to log my releases? Like, is there any way for the GitLab to collect those logs? And if there is a controller for that as well?
So releases, right. So I'm just opening my local and GitLab.com. Deployment releases. Is this page that you wanted to monitor or get logs information?
Yeah, like when I deploy my web application, I usually like have to check the logs if deployment was good and if it's operating. And for that, I need to deploy Elasticsearch with Kibana and the stuff. So I was wondering if GitLab already have this login infrastructure built in.
I think, yeah, for if you're using the GitLab.com, those logins are restricted to the internal GitLab team members. And for the on-premise, I think, yes, I think, yeah, for the on-premise, the if you wanted to capture information about the releases controller, you should be able to grab your production JSON.log. And I think the controller corresponds to his projects : releases. You can just backtrack it to local using. Just verify that. Yes. So this is the releases controller. And on the on-premise, you'll be able to access the log file and get extra metadata that we are logging and information that you require. Does that answer, Anatoly?
Yeah, that's useful. Like I can reuse the login infrastructure of GitLab if I like deploying my application. But yeah, I was looking for something more for users, like user sites for login integrated in GitLab. But this could be useful as well. Thanks.
I wanted to quickly interject. As far as I know, we don't have any kind of SaaS login functionality for clients right now, but I know that the observability team works on some integrations, including, for example, Sentry, so you can log your errors and look them, see them in the GitLab interface. But it's all in development right now, and yeah, for now you need to deploy your own login infrastructure.
Got it. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Vlad. And yeah, if there are no questions on this topic, I can just move on to the next section, which deals with a moderate level of complexity on building on top of a controller. So yeah, I don't see any hands there. So moving on, yeah, I think I'll be able to do this in 10 minutes. So we have the operations controller cleanup, and the issue was to unify the endpoints. So earlier we were having different endpoints for each of these formats, and we wanted to unify. So that is this issue describes that, and yeah. Let me go through the older code so that we'll understand the problem, and then we can just drill down. So this which was rolled out in 14.9. So I'm just browsing the earlier versions of the repository 14.8. We have endpoints. What we notice is it has an index endpoint, an index function, and then an environments function. So these are basically handling the index actions of the controller. And then we had list, which was, so once the index page loaded, which rendered the HTML, we had the front end calling the JSON data. And so these two endpoints were rendering the JSON data. And then we had create and destroy, which performed the respective CRUD operation, which is the creation and destroy, right? So earlier, and in GitLab, we wanted to, we primarily do not recommend having different formats, each of these methods. So what we prefer is to have something like, a single method which handles both the formats. So yeah, that is what this issue describes. And on a high level, we see that it is extending from the application controller. We have a before action, which checks the ability or the policy for the user. And if the user doesn't have access, it renders a not full. Earlier, we saw that there was a list action, but now what we did is we moved the JSON portion inside the same index method. And the environments list inside the environments index action in the index method. So for lack of time, this I'm just leaving it to the team members or the attendees to just run this to see the endpoints and routes. But yeah, it should be a straightforward thing. And just list out what this particular controller does, the endpoints it uses. So in GitLab, we put our routes inside config routes operations. And as I said, the index operation the index operation is performed by particular path in the URL called as operations. And for the environments index, it's operations/environments. And for the create and destroy, we have the equivalent post and the delete call. I'm going to just visit this particular page, and then we'll break down this particular controller. So the operations controller UI is we click the admin and then go to the operations action of the UI field, and then it opens the operation control dashboard. And things are still loading on my local, so I see a bunch of activity here. I think some of the UI and the front end is still loading. So I just drilled out, right? So operations dashboard main function is to get a high level activity and the status of the repositories that we want, or the projects that the admin wants to monitor. In this case, I've already populated these two projects. And I see that the pipelines is passing. And likewise, we have an the environments dashboard, where for a bunch of projects, we'll monitor the various environments for each of these projects. So for the flight project, I had the production and staging environment. Of course, I haven't deployed them. And for this project called Release Template, I have a development environment. So this is what the UI of that controller looks like. We noticed that it was making a get call as part of the network. So when I hit enter here, it loaded an HTML. It made a call to an operation/environments whose response was an HTML. So this is what it did. It hit this particular method, and since it was an HTML call without .js extension or without the format, defaulted to HTML, and it returned the HTML page of it. So we got the HTML response where we have a bunch of JS scripts injected, and it made an XHR call, and now it called operations environments.json, which got a JSON response. So the format, that particular response was handled by this particular piece of block of code, where we serialize as JSONs the projects corresponding. So if we look at what this particular method does, it uses an abstraction or a higher level class called a serializer. So in GitLab, for most of the page, index pages and for listing purposes, we use the serializers. So this is the documentation for it. Primarily, when we wanted to serialize to JSON, we use it, and there are like, and we primarily inherit the grape entities for our serializers. And there is a lot of advantages of using the serializers instead of JSON, and the implementation details are covered in this documentation. So we use serializers for presenting a list or a bunch of data that has to be sent to the client, and for most of these operations like create and destroy, we use the services pattern, and services are nothing but a simple Ruby object, and whenever it's Ruby object, it's just a simple class, and it has a bunch of public methods, not specifically a single public method in GitLab's context. And when invoked, it just returns a response. So if we look at the create method, we call this add projects, and we see that it is calling a service, which is projects create service. We call the execute, and this is what it does, right? So primarily to keep our models thin and to abstract away the CRUD operations, we use the service classes. This is what this particular controller does. And in the current issue, we wanted to unify the formatting options, which we did. Yeah, owing to the lack of time, I'm just going to leave the specs. Because of the cleanups, it is looking like this, but yeah, otherwise it is, the specs for it will be available in the operations controller spec. And another thing that we wanted to highlight here is this particular controller is residing in an high level folder called as EE. So in GitLab, we keep our code, our enterprise edition specific code bases or the code corresponding to the ultimate tier inside the EE path. So there are guidelines on how development should be done. So high level, most of these code which is specific to the ultimate tier or the enterprise edition resides in the base path, high level base path called as EE. And the most important thing is to see how we wanted to include it, right? For example, in the let's go back to the environments controller. So we see this last line here, which does that, and we see that there is no EE here, right? And if I search for environments controller, we see that there are two implementations of the same controller. One is for the CE edition, and another one is for the enterprise edition. If I go to the enterprise edition, what I notice is having some extra information or some extra details with specific to permissions, right? But this controller is actually using some of those, is actually using the entire code that is available in the front CE. And if you wanted that to be inherited, we'll have to ensure that we always prepend mod with is added to the controller, to the CE controller, so that the E controller can use that. So yeah, and other details on using the developing E features and how we should structure it inside the project is available in this documentation. So yeah, that is what I wanted to cover, and I can just take questions. And I can leave the advance for the next community officers. I can just take questions on both of these sections if there are any.
I have another question. I don't know if it specifically pertains to these two topics, but in one of the merge requests you had briefly shown, there was talk of pushing something to a staging environment and doing some testing on that. Is that something that community members should think about when they're ready to ship something, or is that something more that the maintainers would do on behalf of us after an MR is ready? Or is just testing on the local GDK server sufficient?
Can you just repeat that, Missy? I missed the core part of it.
Yeah, so usually like in my work, when I am ready to ship something, I ship it first to our staging environment. I'll test it locally on like my local server. Then I'll ship it to staging and I'll do some testing in there before I ship it to production. Does GitLab do something similar? Are community members able to do that? Or are we just capped at testing at the local GDK server, but can't quite go to the staging? And that's something that maintainers would do.
Yeah, so most of our developers as well in GitLab run the test in the local environment for the features that we wanted to iterate or build upon. So we ensure that the aspects and the code coverage is good. And we submit an MR. And the MR runs on the pipelines corresponding to the master branch, where we have where we can resolve the merge conflicts. So to answer your question, we don't directly get to deploy our particular branch alone on a staging environment and test it. It goes to the master where the merge happens. And the master is and the main branch, the GitLab stable branch, is deployed to various environments. It progresses like staging, canary, staging, and then production. And the progress of all those stages will be seen in MRs as labels. For example, let me just take one of the MRs where we can just monitor in which environment that particular MR is in. So once you submit a merge request, we have a bot which does the population on when these merges happens. So yeah, so you see here, right, the releases tools bot, it tags the labels on the particular environment where this MR is made. So as a developer, we just worry about ensuring that the pipelines are green, and then it is merged. So once it is merged, based on these labels, we can go to these particular environments where we can do QA testing, and then if there are regressions, we do bug fixes follow. Does that answer, Missy?
Yes, that helps. Thank you.
Bala, do you mind if I try answering Missy's question a little more directly? I think I heard your question, Missy, was around like, am I stuck like testing out my apps locally on my workstation, or like would GitLab allow me to do some of that like as part of the development process? So in plus one to everything Bala said, in addition to that, GitLab has an auto DevOps feature that you can go on in your project or repository, go into settings, turn on auto DevOps. And then if you're using like a feature branch methodology to do your development work, the auto DevOps automatically turns on something called a review app. And what that allows you to do is actually see and test your changes. Like it runs like a small version of your particular feature branch that you just made changes to. And then you can actually go in and use that review app to test and make sure that like the changes you made really make sense. It's really performing how you would expect it to be performing. And if that looks good, you could of course follow all the process that Bala just mentioned with merge request and merging your working changes into a main or production type branch. I hope that helps. I'm sorry if I misunderstood your question. I'm in a noisy coffee shop.
No, that definitely helps a lot. And I don't know if you have a link in mind or anywhere in the docs that I could look at just to see more about where to find that information. That would be awesome.
I'll throw some stuff into the chat here as Bala keeps talking on GitLab review apps. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll interject as well then. I think, yeah, what you were looking at was the review app. We do have access when we develop in the main GitLab project. I don't think that you'll have access for it in the fork, but maybe on this special community fork, I asked you to move your merge request to. Maybe you'll be able to see if you go to the pipeline, try to find something like start the review up there. Maybe it is there, maybe not. It's if it's not there, maybe it's a good question for our community kind of relations team to implement and add these review apps. There.
Yeah. So. So this was one of the MRs that we did today, and it just does documentation update. once I put this MR in place, the contributors or the merge request authors will be able to view this particular widget. So in this case, I haven't deployed it because in my local I ensured it, but yeah. So this just runs a review app for that particular documentation, and once it is up, you'll be able to click and then view that change in local. So yeah, thanks for that external addition, Matt. I missed the point. All right, I think we are already way ahead of time, and I can take further questions, or I can just pass it over to Emily. Any questions? Cool. All right, thanks everyone. I'm just going to stop sharing, and we'll just do the advanced controller topic that I wanted to cover in the next office hours, and I'll pass it over to Emily.
Awesome. Yes. Thanks so much, Bella, for walking us through all that. I think we're kind of at time now, so I'll speed through the last portion, which is just highlighting some of our issues open for community contributors. I think you all have access to the agenda, but on point 5, there's a link there. And in that link, you can kind of find all the open issues for community contributors to start working on. So if you'd like to help us out, feel free to look through that list and see if there's anything that interests you. And as always, our next meetings will be detailed in the epic listed under point 6 there. And I think that's all. Unless anyone else has any final questions, we can kind of end it off. Cool. Thanks everyone for joining, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.